Hey everybody, this is live lunch conversations with Randy and Teddy, and Randy's not here today, so he doesn't count. I'm Teddy Burris. For those who've never met me, I love doing this stuff. I show up. This is show 83, I think, that we're doing, and my special sub co-host is Miss Cindy Martin from High Point, North by God, Carolina, and so I'll get her to introduce herself in a minute. So those who don't know what I do, I'm a LinkedIn strategist, sales navigator, strategist, trainer, and coach. And I teach business professionals how to use LinkedIn as a business tool. Love doing that work, but I also love showing up every week for lunch conversations. We bring special guests in. Our special guest today is Les Fenyves. And Les will introduce himself in a minute. Once I get Cindy to introduce herself to the audience as well. Cindy?
My name is Cindy Martin. My company is Smarten International. I teach people to smarten up their civility, their professionalism, their appearance, so that when they go to the interview, they look like the person that needs to be hired.
Yeah, yeah, cool. And Cindy's a Toastmaster. Cindy's a giver in the community. She shows up in a lot of the places that I've shown up at before, mostly virtually now. And so anybody who wants to know more about Cindy, I'll drop her LinkedIn profile URL for you to look her up. Come here, computer. Get over here. Get over here. So that you can follow her. That would be the word that I would use. Follow her on LinkedIn. So our special guest today is Les Fenyves. And that's Hungarian. I hope I pronounced it right. Fenyves.
Close, Fenyves.
Fenyves. I got it. So Les is out in California, and in the Silicon Valley area of California. His background's in technology and sales management. Les also spends a lot of time helping people in the career space, the career transition, job search space. I met Les through a mutual conversation in California where I did some work and had a great conversation. Decided, you know what, Randy and I have talked about bringing some really good grassroots kind of stuff back. And so Les is going to come to us and is going to bring a conversation all about how to sell yourself in the interview. So Les, if you could introduce yourself a little better than I did to the audience, and then we'll get started.
Okay, well, let's see. I worked in high tech. I worked on computers. First computer I wrote programs on in the 60s had vacuum tubes, just to date me a little bit. I was a technical person and then a salesperson in the computer industry. And then I became a technical recruiter in IT in '78. I worked for North America's largest IT search firm, started their Toronto branch, built it to the largest branch in North America, got promoted, was a vice president. I was based in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, not San Francisco, the Bay Area, and I had 22 offices, everything from St. Louis West reporting to me. In '85, I started my own search firm in the Valley. I recruited for all the big names, Apple, IBM, HP, plus all the startups. Oracle when they had 200 employees, Yahoo when they had 50, Google when they had under 100. And I retired 4 years ago at the end of 2017. And since then, I've been basically windsurfing. And then when I have a few minutes, I teach classes and coach people on job hunting skills.
Cool.
And I've written a book on that.
Yeah.
And I've got a Google Drive with over 500 pages of information on job hunting. And I also have a number of training videos on YouTube that people can all of this is available for free, by the way.
Yeah. So windsurfing, I mean, is this on water or on land or both?
Windsurfing is strictly water, right?
Oh,
San Francisco Bay, one of the best places in North America to windsurf, actually.
I saw a TikTok video of a dude windsurfing on a skateboard. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, you can do that on dry land when the wind is very light and there's not enough wind to go on the water. People do that in the parking lot.
Yeah. So here's how we're going to do this again today, folks. Randy's out and about. He's out doing a service project he's a part of Leadership Winston-Salem. So he's out doing that. I don't think he's haunting us today. I haven't seen a text message from him. So I think he's really doing what he said he's going to be doing. Cindy's going to be paying attention to the chat. Cindy may or may not pay attention to the Q&A. It's up to her. And if you have a question or you want to engage in the conversation by chat, do that. Is that fair to offer up, Cindy?
Yep.
Yeah. So good stuff. So Les, talk about your book a little bit. You wrote a book on how to sell yourself in an interview. Why did you write that book?
Oh, and why did I choose that title as well?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, the thesis of the book is that an interview is a specialized sales call where you are both the salesperson and the product. There's no other example of that. And the techniques that one uses to sell cars, airplanes, software, you name it, are exactly the same techniques that you would use in order to sell yourself in an interview. And that's the thesis of the book. That's why I called it, you probably hear all the time, you have to sell yourself in an interview, but I've never seen anybody explain how to actually do that. And that's what I do in the book.
Yeah. Now, just curious, why did you write that book? Why do you think it was important for people to have that book? And I'm being facetious with my question, but I think it's important for the answer.
So why? Well, I've been giving out advice on and coaching people for interviews since 1978.
Mm-hmm.
And 2014, I was getting near retirement. I was 66. I got invited by Stanford Graduate School of Business to put on some workshops in job hunting skills. And I did that 2015. But at that point, I was still working, so I decided, well, I'm not going to teach. I don't have time. But I have all this great material. I should do something with it. So I converted all my workshop materials into a book. And the book encapsulates advice I've been giving out since 78, as I said.
Yeah. I get it. Good stuff. Cindy?
Yeah, there's a question now that says that they just watched Dan Locke's video, and it seems that he uses a direct and assertive style in the interview. And I know, Les, that you're going to talk about the soft and direct versus the hard. But I just wanted to mention that question's out there.
Yeah, good.
So you're asking me a question about that?
We'll get to that in a minute then. We'll get to that in a few minutes because I do know that is coming up in the talking points that I put together with Les. So Les, sell yourself in an interview. I get that. Sell yourself. I mean, you got to really ponder what that means. What does it take? What are some key steps that you think are important that when you're selling yourself in an interview?
Well, you have to learn some basic selling skills, and that's what my book does. Okay. You don't have to become an expert. You just have to have more selling skills than your competition. You may have heard the joke about the hikers in the woods, where they two hikers come face to face with a grizzly, and one hiker says, "Let's run," and the other hiker says, "You're crazy, you can't outrun a grizzly." First guy says, "Well, no, I don't have to be faster than the grizzly. I just have to be faster than you." In the same way, in an interview, you don't have to be perfect as a salesperson. You just have to have more skills than your competition. And to be honest with you, 99% of the people in interviews have zero selling skills, have zero training in selling. They have been coached on how to answer questions, but that's not selling. Yeah. Selling is something else.
Yeah. And Cindy and I were talking earlier about interviewing, and Cindy had a really good perspective that I don't know if you're going to talk about it or not, but a part of selling, probably one, I think, and I fail at this miserably, that one of the most powerful skills in selling is the power of listening.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So selling, people think that selling is the gift of gab. Salespeople are good at talking. Well, great salespeople are differentiated by three things. They're good at asking questions. They're excellent listeners, and they're excellent closers. So the most important selling skills, which my book teaches, are closing and questioning and controlling the interview through skilled questioning and then listening.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Good stuff. Let's dig a little deeper. So if selling is an important skill in the interview, and all the pieces that come up with that, that ability to sell, all the pieces of, talk a little bit more about some of these selling skills. And I think you're also going to talk about the importance of controlling the interview.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the two things of closing and control. But the first thing that I think everybody should get an answer to is lots of people give out advice. There's no shortage of job hunting advice. So what I like to tell people is that job hunting is like real estate. Anybody who's ever owned a house, lived in a house, or lived in a town that had houses automatically considers themselves a real estate expert. And they're extremely generous in sharing that expertise whenever you're buying or selling a house. Same thing's true in job hunting. As soon as people find out you're looking, they give you no help, no end of advice. You should do this, you should do that, here's what you should do in the interview, here's what your resume should. And frankly, most of it is bunk and confusing and doesn't really help. Because people just think they know a lot more than they actually do. It's called the illusion of explanatory depth. It's a well-studied psychology. So anyway, so what I try to do is simplify things and focus on things that work. And these things I didn't just invent since I retired. I've been giving this advice out since, as I said, 78, and it works. I've got anecdotal evidence to support that. People I've coached and used these techniques have done very well. But more than that, I've got some hard evidence. I started teaching at a job search group in the beginning of this year. Before I showed up, they have chapters around the nation. The typical unemployed person took 15 weeks to find a job. Mm-hmm. Since I've been teaching, that average is now 8 weeks.
Oh.
Now, if you're earning $100,000 a year, that's $2,000 a week. If you can shorten your job search by 7 weeks, that's $14,000 in your pocket. So the fact is, what I teach works. I've been teaching it for a job search group full-time, not full-time, but part-time since I retired. Yeah. And the stories I get from those people are affirming. I just helped a guy get a job at Microsoft. And he said, I had an interview, I closed, and it's a good thing I did because I found out I had a problem. And I closed and I dealt with it. I got the job. I had a manager tell him, hey, you know what? I really like you close. I haven't had a candidate try to close me in a long time. And he got, and he got the thumbs up. Anyway, so let's talk about closing because that's what I'm talking about. So okay. Closing, what that is while you're in the interview, not afterwards, but during the interview, at the end, you want to ask for a commitment to move to the next step, or at least you want to ask for feedback. So there are two kinds of closes, as you mentioned earlier. There's a soft close, and a soft close asks for an opinion or a feedback from the person. And then there's a hard close, which asks for a commitment to the next step. So to give you an example, a soft close would be, do you think I'm a good fit for your team? Do you think I'm qualified for this job? Where do you see me fitting into the team? So something asking for an opinion. And then if the person gives you a positive answer, yeah, I think you're qualified, then you go for a hard close, which is asking for something from them. Well, you think I'm a good fit? Well, great, I think I'm a good fit too, and I'm really interested. So how do we move forward? When should I meet your boss? Or if it's at the final interview, you ask, well, I'm excited, I want to work here. And you say I'm a good fit, so can I expect an offer from you?
Yeah, I get that. I get soft close opinion, hard close. A hard close doesn't need to be pushy or demanding.
Oh, absolutely. Let me just qualify that. That's a very good point. Pushiness is not what I'm saying. Pushiness is telling people what to do. Hey, listen, I got 3 other offers. You got to make a decision right away. You got to hire me. Yeah. And if you want me, you got to come up with an answer now. That's pushy.
Yeah.
What I'm advising is asking questions, which is pulling. Yes, Cindy.
So, to reiterate Dean's question, is it too direct to say that? To say, well, what do you need next from me to move to the next meeting? Can we
Good
set up a
question.
meeting for 10 a.m. Tuesday?
Okay. It's a good question. People are often hesitant to do these things because they think, oh, I'm going to come off as too strong. They're going to be offended. So what I do is I give people an example. So Cindy, I'm the CEO of a company and you're interviewing with me for a senior level position. And at the end of the interview, I say, Cindy, you and I just spent 30 minutes here getting acquainted, and I'm really impressed. I think you're smart, you're capable, I think you do a great job here, and everybody else you've spoken with here gives you a strong thumbs up. So, I'm convinced I want you on my team. So now I'd like to ask you, what do you think? Do you think this is a place you'd like to work? Do you want to come and join us? How does that sound? Is that pushy?
No.
No, never. Never was there. Nobody's going to be offended. And that's how you close in the interview on the other side. Tell the person, yeah, I really like these 3 things about your company. I like the challenge. I think I could do a great job. I've liked everybody else I've met here. And so, hey, I'm ready to move forward. What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea? Yeah.
Is it okay? So let's say you as the interviewee, is it okay to overcome an objective by asking a question back to them?
Absolutely. So I can't teach closing in this. This is just a little
Right.
introduction. I teach a 2-hour workshop, which I just did yesterday. Chapter 1 of my book describes this in great detail. I also have a YouTube video. If you want to put up the link to my Google Drive.
I'll drop it all in chat, and I'll drop it all in on the YouTube channel when I publish.
People should go to my Google Drive.
Yeah, I'll drop all that in there.
And yes, you should overcome concerns. If they have a reservation, yes, you want to deal with it. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay. And now we have a question from Kilby that says, does the book address how to increase one's confidence, or do you have advice? Low confidence is often a barrier to
Great, exactly, good. So let me just address that one, because there are ways you can increase your confidence. So the other part of interview success besides closing is controlling the interview. Okay, and so as far as closing confidence, the way you do that is you practice offline. It's like Toastmasters, right? You want to get to be good at public speaking, you get in front of people. So you practice the closing offline with a friend, with another person who's also looking, if you're in a job search group, whatever. So practice offline helps you. It desensitizes you to the anxiety you may feel about asking these questions. And then the other part of confidence is the control. So interview control consists of 2 parts. Part 1 is preparation, what you do before you show up.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 3 and Chapter 6 of my book talk about this in detail. And what happens with preparation is you develop greater confidence before you show up, because you know what's going to happen in the interview. And then the other thing is, once you show up for the interview, that increased confidence will help you perform better. So people, it's a psychological fact. People are smart, but they have cognitive flaws. One of the cognitive flaws is, so I read an interesting book called Scout Mindset, is people are judged to be expert not by the quality of the answers that they give, or the accuracy of the information, but by the confidence with which they deliver the answers. So if you can prepare well, you'll be more confident, you'll be judged more competent, and you're going to do better in the interview and get more job offers. Yes, indeed.
I like that. Now, you said earlier that basic selling skills are essential versus having been coached on answering questions.
Okay, so let me just say this. There are 4 levels of activities that happen in an interview. The bottom layer is questions you can ask. If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? No way to prepare for those off-the-wall questions. There are millions of those, so just ignore those. The second layer is job-specific questions or they ask you skills questions. You have to be able to answer those. So you do have to prepare for skills questions. And there are lots and lots of sources of advice on that. For instance, in the software field, there's a 700-page book called How to Ace the Coding Interview. So, so
700
people
pages.
spend lots and lots of time on that.
Yeah.
Okay. The third layer are questions that come up often. Let me finish this and then I'll answer your question. The third layer is common questions. How much money do you want? Tell me when you failed. So you have to be prepared for those as well. And lots of advice for that. My Google Drive talks about that. The top level, which is things you have to do in every single interview, like smile, maintain eye contact. So there are tips, lots of those. The other thing you have to do is you have to close. Nobody teaches that. You have to control the interview by asking questions. Nobody teaches that. The third thing is you have to know your product. Some of that is taught. So those are the three things where I see a huge lack in the marketplace, and that's what my book addresses mostly. Although 85% of my book talks about that, 15% of my book talks about the common questions, how to answer the salary question, for example. I have a chapter on that. How to answer some of these common questions. What are your weaknesses? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Whatever. So I do talk about those things. But that's not the emphasis because there's lots and lots of advice available on that. You have to be prepared for that. But start with the closing. That is 20 pages of all the 500 pages on that. If you're good at that, that's worth as much as the all other 480 pages. Good. Guarantee you. Okay, so question.
Yes, another one of the questions was, what's a good way to overcoming lack of experience? Should you ask a question like,
Okay, so are you talking about fresh graduates? Are you talking fresh graduates?
Maybe not. Maybe just somebody
career transition. So that's a different problem, okay? Yeah. And that's a complicated problem. There's no one answer for that. I have a folder on my Google Drive, Career Advice for Fresh Graduates. Mm-hmm. So it's called Career Advice, and there's also one for fresh graduates. Look at the material in that. That addresses these questions. Cool. So that's a long subject. I don't think we have enough time for that today.
Yeah, and before we go to Lisa's question, Cindy, let's move forward a little bit more, and we'll get to Lisa's question in a minute. Okay. If Lisa would allow me to pause on that for a minute. So I want to go back to that control the interview, because by golly, Les, I know how to control an interview. I can take ownership of this. I can keep them on task on my talking points, but I don't think that's what you mean by taking control of an interview. Talk about that a little bit more, will you?
Okay. So, well, actually,
I got preparation. I got execution.
What I mean by that.
Let me clarify, because I've got the preparation. I got the execution. I got that. But we're sitting in a room. How do I help manage the agenda and the flow of the conversation?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. As a rookie, a beginner, you're not going to be able to do what an expert interviewer can do. Okay? So when you show up for these interviews, you have your questions prepared. Again, I won't go into detail how you do that, but you want to have these questions that get the person talking. When you hear, and you do listen when they're talking. You respond to questions as appropriate. But when you show up, there are three things that I want you to focus on at the beginning. Number one, you've got to establish rapport at the very beginning of the interview. This is really important.
Yeah.
And there are a number of reasons for that. One, would you buy a used car from somebody you don't trust? Clearly not. How about a used job? How about a used employee? So if you and the interviewer don't trust each other, the interview will fail. So rapport building establishes that trust. It starts the trust building. And on my Google Drive, there's a folder, How to Establish Rapport in an Interview. It cites an academic study where people who took the time to establish rapport were far more successful in interviews than those people who didn't. So that's my number one advice. The second thing is you want to try to ask the first question.
Yeah.
All right? So after you get bored and say, hey, Teddy, I was excited to meet you here today. And, you know, I noticed you and I know these three people in common. And then afterwards, and so, you know, I had a look at this job description, and it seems like it fits me to a T, but I want to understand from you, what do you think are the most important qualities for a person to be successful in this job? So now I've asked the first question. Now we can have a conversation. And then as a listener, but what most people do is they show up and say, here's my resume, here's the job description, ask me anything. You're not a witness on the stand. You're not defending your PhD thesis in an oral exam. You're there to sell. So think about it this way. If a person comes to your house to sell you a new roof, and they show up and say, here's the product brochures, why don't you have a look at it and ask me anything, and then just sit there silently. That's not what a successful salesperson does. Okay, successful salespeople, they charge, ask questions, find out what the need is, and then present information that's relevant to what the need is. So when you hear something, hey, we need somebody who's managed offshore teams, that's one of the key things. Well, tell me about what the biggest challenges are at managing offshore teams. Oh, communication. Well, I understand that perfectly, because at my last position, we had this team, we had 3 countries we were coordinating, and it was a nightmare, but here's what I did to manage that, and here's why that project was successful. So you get it. So it's not, you have to present information, but first you have to ask to find out what's on the interviewer's mind.
Yeah.
Okay, did I answer your question, Teddy?
Yep. Cindy, do you have it? Yes, you did. Cindy, another question to come up?
Yes. Let's see. Well, first, let's see. Let's ask Lisa's question first. What do you do about gaps?
What kind of gap are you talking about?
Employment gaps?
Oh, gap in your resume. Okay. All right. So that's an issue. So one of the things is interviews don't go smoothly. Nobody's a perfect candidate. No job is perfect, right? So before you show up for the interview, you have to understand what potential concerns or reservations people may have about you. You know, you look at the job, they want 10 years experience, you've only got 6. That might come up. You've got a gap. You know, don't assume that, don't try to sweep it under the carpet. It's going to come up. So how do you deal with that? What you need in general to deal with those is come up with a story that explains it away. So one of the Stanford people that I was back in 2015, he'd been unemployed for 3 years. And he got laid off, the company got bought, the new management, he had a political fallout, he got basically fired, although they called it a layoff, nobody, you know. And then he was looking, couldn't get a job because he was very high priced, $500K a year, investment banker. And then he went to Stanford, and then after he graduated, you know, he was consulting, looking for a job, and it's now 3 years have gone by. So I gave him a story.
Yeah. He had the story, he just didn't know how to tell it.
Well, he didn't know this. He had the facts. He didn't know how the story. There's a difference. Yeah. So what you do is you take the facts and you weave them into a story that gives people some reassurance that you're not some weirdo. There's nothing. The reason you have this gap is not because you're some psychopath or because you're a deeply flawed candidate, but you're just a human being that things happen to. Yeah. And so if you can explain that away in a credible way, you have to be confident, non-defensive, and it should sound reassuring. Okay, and every story is different. Go ahead, Cindy.
No, Cindy, give me a minute. Give me a moment.
It's time.
12:30. I gotta stop. So thank you. So, hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. Randy's not here today. Filling in for Randy is Cindy Martin, is my special co-host. Our special guest on the show today is Les Fenyves. and Les is having a conversation with us about interviews and how to sell yourself in an interview. If you know anybody who's interested in the conversations that we share in the context of job search and business and career and community, please invite anybody you know to the show. We do it every Wednesday at 11:55 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you know anybody who wants to participate in making this show a success, i.e. sponsors or people who can help us build it out, please introduce us. I'm Teddy Burris. My special co-host today is Cindy Martin, and we're back to Les to continue the conversation. Cindy, you had a question you were queuing up for.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier, I'm a Toastmaster, been a Toastmaster for 23 years, and you must keep that story concise. Do not make it long. Because
exactly, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Not a half hour, not even 5 minutes. Exactly. Good point.
So and in the context of interviewing, that's important. Most of the time the coaches say you got 2 minutes to answer a question. I don't think you have 2 minutes to answer a question. I think you got 20 or 30 seconds to answer that question, and then weave the story around it and bring it back to a deeper conversation with the question. So Les, thoughts on that?
Oh, okay. So absolutely. So when people ask you a skills question, say, tell me about your knowledge on this. So some things were elaborate and you have to explain, but one of the techniques I talk about in my book is called a tie-down question. So every 30 seconds of answers, you make a point and say, well, this is what we did. Then you throw back a question back at the person and say, well, does that jibe with what your understanding? Do you agree with that? Okay, good. You don't go on for half an hour. You lost them in the first 30 seconds, and you've spent the next 29 minutes just gabbing and just hot-aired, and they're not listening anymore. So you want to periodically get feedback. So one other thing that I guess I want to emphasize about questioning and why you ask questions in these interviews. And so in tennis, the person on serve has a huge advantage. So if you watch this Wimbledon final and Roger Federer got to serve every point, well, there's no point turning in because he's going to win the match. There's no question about it. Being on serve is a massive advantage. Well, asking the question is like being on serve. If you show up for the interview and they're asking you their questions, you're always on return serve. You have to break serve. You're going to be on the defensive. Your likely outcome is you're going to lose. Whereas if you're asking the question, you're on serve, you're on the attack, and you're in control, and you're more likely to win that point and also ultimately the match.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, always be on, as much as you can, be serving rather than simply responding. So good point. Cindy, any other questions out there?
There is a kind of a follow-up question. She says, I'm often shocked that people forget about the 2008 recession where we all got laid off.
Yeah. So
okay. So again, that's ancient history today, but so you don't need to spend more than 15, 20 seconds talking about that. Again, it depends on where your gaps are. If the gap's more recent. So I had a person as an example, came to my workshop. She'd been a homemaker for 10 years. So what I told her is write a resume that shows you how many years you spent at each shop, but take the dates off. And she got on the phone, got an interview, and she was partway into it before they realized she'd been a housewife and mother for 10 years. But by then she'd done well enough in the interview that it didn't matter, and she got the job. So there are different ways of dealing with these things. Go ahead.
Oh, let me talk about the skills of a housewife, which is the improper term. But
Well, call it
The
what you will. I
skills,
don't know.
I recommend that people put in the skills that it takes to run a family,
That's
and it
also a
takes
strategy
a lot
too.
of skills.
Yeah,
And we're
absolutely.
not going
We
to
want to
get her
talk about that
started
in the interview for
That's
sure.
right.
Yeah.
unless
That's
we're not
right,
going to get
Daddy.
her started. There's two types of running a household, and one is a household where both parties are working, and another is a household where one's retired. But that's a conversation we'll have for another day. Hey, let's go back to thank you, Cindy. Let's go back to that rapport part, because I think that's important. How do you build rapport? I'll give you an example of how you don't build rapport. A business owner of mine has this huge blue marlin fish on the back of his wall. I mean, that thing is 15 feet wide, okay, and 4 feet, 5 feet tall. It's
My
huge.
father-in-law caught one. He had to put an addition on his house.
This guy put it up, and I asked him. He's a friend of mine. He owns a business. I said, dude, why do you have that there? Because I know daggone well you don't go fishing. He says, I got it because I thought it was really, really cool. And he says, you can't imagine the number of people who come in who try to build rapport with me and say, oh man, I've caught a fish like that as well. And they don't even ask him, what is it? It's a fake rapport building. Let's talk a little bit more about some good tactics about building rapport when you start off.
Okay, so that's a big subject. There's no one right way.
Yeah, but there's some tactics that make sense.
Okay, so you got to research the people that you're going to talk to.
Yeah.
Okay. You can do what Google stock them, look them up on LinkedIn. And so let me give you a typical example where you're doing a peer interview as opposed to a manager interview, coworker, right? One of the best ways to start with a coworker is, hey, I looked you up on LinkedIn. I see you've been here for 15 years. Obviously, you know this place inside out, and you really like it. What's kept you here all these years? Why do you feel this is so good? What do you like about it here? And that gets them to talk about themselves as opposed to the job necessarily. The other thing is, if you and this person have worked at the same company, or I noticed you worked at such and such a company, did you know Bill Brown who was there? So people in common are best. So one of the person, when you're looking for a handyman, for instance, you're going to talk to your friends and neighbors, right? So personal recommendation, we tend to trust people who know people we trust. So people in common are a good way. Shared interest could be a good way. With LinkedIn, with Zoom, it's very difficult. If I used to meet with people in person in the office, you could get clues from their office, like the marlin. I wouldn't start by I caught a fish. I'd say, well, that's a fantastic fish. You must be really proud of that. When did you catch it? Well, tell me the story. And now I discover, hey, I didn't catch it. So one of the problems with rapport building is don't talk about yourself, ask about the other person. Okay? Ask first. Yeah, Cindy.
So let's talk about building rapport over a Zoom versus in person.
Then you got to ask the questions of what I just gave you an example. Research a person and refer to something you've learned in your research. Okay? And again, the things are, I get no clues from your office particularly. Okay? I get some clues from Teddy's office. I would say, well, Teddy, good to meet you today. Bye. I see your mottos up there.
You see
Hashtag breathe and hashtag growth. I'm interested in why you put those up. What's that all about?
Yeah. And there's a story behind these things. So in a different.
I can't see those very well. They're kind of tiny, but their breathe and growth, that's prominent. So there's obviously a reason why you put that up there. I'd sure like to know about it.
Yeah.
So ask people, if you show interest in the other person, you're going to be viewed more favorably.
Yeah, real good.
Anyway, so there's lots of documentation on how to establish rapport, both in my book and also on my Google Drive. There's a whole folder devoted to that.
Yeah, and
That's
I'm gonna
really
drop. By the way,
important.
for those who are asking in the chat, you can't save it. You can click on the hyperlinks if I were in fact to make it a hyperlink, and I will change. Let's see, I dropped it in. Yeah, they're all hyperlinks. You should be able to click on those. If Dean or Chan, let confirm for me. Can you click on those hyperlinks, and does it take you to those links? But again, I'm gonna put it in the YouTube channel so everybody can get to it there.
Yeah,
So
just
because
so
this is
you
a
know,
lot, I went
everybody
through
should
it.
bookmark my Google Drive.
Yeah,
And
yeah, a
that's
lot
very
of
important.
really, really cool content in there. Thanks, Chan, for everybody to consume. I've looked through it a couple of times now, and Les, I'm very grateful for you sharing that with everybody as well. And so, go back, Cindy. Question, thought.
Well, I have a question. One of the things is you say the person on the receiving end usually loses the point.
In tennis, that's what I'm talking about. So when a
Oh, okay.
tennis, the person who serves the ball wins the
Right.
match. I
Typically,
mean,
right.
if you serve every point on a tennis match, you're going to win, unless you're playing against somebody clearly far better than you.
But in an interview, you can't talk too much
Okay,
or
so yeah, so let me explain to you how that works in practice.
okay.
So tell me what's the most important part of this job? And the person said, well, we really need somebody who's excellent at multitasking, running multiple activities at the same time. Well, tell me about that. How's that work? How many projects? What is it? So you look, and then what you want to use is a technique called active listening. I talk about it in my book.
Mhm.
Active listening. So there's two types of listening: passive, which is what most people do. If you have a speaker and they're talking, you silently listen politely. In an interview, that you want to do partly that. You don't want to interrupt people. But when they finish talking, you want to do active listening, which is repeating what they said and expanding on it. And so, okay, so for this job, running 5 things at the same time, that seems like to be the biggest challenge, right? Well, great, because I've got several examples where I've had to do that. Would you like to hear about that? Okay, so I'm understand something. My technique, I intersperse everything with a question.
Yeah,
Questioning is pulling. Telling people what they should do is pushiness. So you notice that I'm actually moving the agenda forward, but I'm doing it with questions. Now that's very difficult to do. That takes years of practice. You're not going to do it, so just ask the first question, and then after that, do your best.
yeah. But again, you use the phrase, Les, that I use all the time. You use the tactic to get better at this is to practice. And if you're
Absolutely.
not willing to practice, you're going to muddle through this on a regular basis. Look, I've gotten much better at doing these shows. It used to be when I did these shows, I was looking at you all the time to see what your response and how you're going to react to the conversation or what I share. But what I've discovered is I can't be staring at you and looking for your reaction. I've got to be talking to you by looking at the camera. Comes with practice.
You should be on the nightly news.
You've got to be. Cindy?
Lisa has a question. What if you get ghosted by the employer, and if you find you do not receive an invite to continue or an offer, what's the best way to ask for feedback so you can improve for a future interview? Now, this isn't while in the interview, this is after the interview.
Okay, that ship sailed. The
Yeah.
problem was she didn't close in the interview.
Okay.
So this is why it's so important to close in the interview. It's essential. Afterwards, you have no control. If they don't return your emails, don't respond to your phone calls or voicemails, you know, you're powerless to do anything about it other than show up at their doorstep, right? So that's not going to work. So this is why closing, as I said, it's 50% of success in interviews. If you're good at closing, you won't have these ghosting problems because you'll know before you walk out the door why you're not going to get called back.
Yeah.
And that's as valuable as getting to the next step.
Yeah. And so towards that end, Les, if you try to close and get them to commit to the next step, then if you can't, then you've done all you can do. You can't beat that horse anymore. Oh, wait a minute. Are we allowed to say that online?
So the point is, I was a very good salesperson, but I didn't close every percent of that deal. However, when I failed to make the sale, I always made it a point to know why not. So sometimes it was because I made a mistake. Okay, so people make mistakes. So I learned from that. Other times it was something that was beyond my control that I couldn't deal with. So they got a higher offer, for instance, or the candidate just blew the interview, right? Those are beyond my control, but at least I knew why I didn't make the sale. And that's how, and then you just sleep at night. You don't second guess yourself. Whereas if you don't know why, you say, what did I do wrong? How could I have done it better? And what happens is you start having self-doubt, and self-doubt is a motivation killer.
Yep. Yeah.
So you don't want to get into that.
Yeah. So Les, I'm going to spin this a little bit and take you off course, because I do that.
Sure, take your time.
And it's my show. I can do that.
It's true. I'm here at your beck and call.
I appreciate you being here, buddy. This is good stuff, and I really appreciate it. Lots of great questions coming through, so it tells me that people are paying attention. One of the things that I've learned, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is that I can get to an interview. I can apply and hope and pray and get to an interview. There's also the tactics you can apply that can help you get to the interview in a much better position than every other candidate who shows up at that interview. And that's what's called referrals. That's when you get introduced to a hiring manager, to a business owner, to a department lead. And basically that person is encouraged by someone that they trust, respect, and like, that they need to have a meeting with Cindy. They need to meet this dude named Les. They need to have a conversation with Teddy. Can you talk about that for a minute in the context of what you've learned over the years and what works?
Okay, so that's called networking, right?
Yeah.
So the book is on interviews. It doesn't talk about networking.
Okay.
However, on my Google Drive, there are two things. One, there's a folder called Quick Start Guides.
Okay.
And there's a document. It says How to Conduct a Successful Job Search Quick Start Guide. It's 20 pages. Back of the last 2 pages are a checklist. So that talks about soup to nuts on how to find a job. Everything from resumes to networking to interviews to negotiation. And I have workshops on the negotiation on YouTube. There's also a folder, a subfolder on how to network to find a job with a bunch of great articles.
Yeah.
All right. So in general, networking is the best way to find a job. So, for instance, after I retired, I decided I spent 6 months just goofing off, right? And then I said, well, okay, so now I want to do something. And I had a couple of ideas. One was teaching, which I'd already done. And the other was I could go to work for an outplacement firm. Outplacement firms are hired by companies when they lay off 1,000 employees. Mm-hmm. They coach these laid off people, help them with a resume, help them with interviews. So I thought one natural avenue would be to work for an outplacement firm and as a counselor, part-time. So long story short, I went through, looked on LinkedIn, found a contact, outplacement firm, didn't know anybody there, but she was a remote contact. She introduced me to the hiring manager. I got the phone interview. I sold an in-person interview. Let's meet next Tuesday, and say, oh, by the way, would you like to see my resume? and all of a sudden, oh yeah. So then I had to put together a resume. So I got the interview before the resume. I went to the interview. I got the offer. I turned it down because I wasn't looking for that too much of a commitment. The teaching I do through referrals. Yeah. I reached out to people. So you want to reach out to people, get introductions. Yep. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yes, sir.
Now Missouri has a question. He has mixed response on building rapport. Making conversation is one thing, engaging is another. I have found that a polite smile to start off, followed by silence, giving them a chance to begin, followed by engaging interaction, prevents the temptation of taking charge or making an interaction and integration. It also demonstrates that I am a good listener.
Okay, wrong.
Yeah, it's a
That's not
tactic.
how successful salespeople work. Wrong.
Yeah.
So think about it. Salesman shows up at your house to sell you roofing materials. Hi, how are you?
Yeah.
What do you think of this salesperson? Okay, so that's not how you sell. That's so one of the things that's a problem is sales ability, is sales talent. It's like musical talent.
So in the content, but Les here, I'm going to help. I'm going to support Don a little bit. I don't think Don is talking about selling at that point. He's talking about building rapport.
Don is wrong.
Yeah.
That is wrong.
Yeah, this may not be clearly
wrong,
in an interview.
Wrong.
Okay.
Period.
Yeah.
Okay? You want to build rapport with people, you ask a question, get them talking. So silence can get people talking, but then you have no control over what they say. And now they start firing questions at you about your resume without doing any rapport building. Now what are you going to do? Now you got to backtrack.
Yeah.
Right? So if I sit down with a person, the first thing they do is, okay, well, great. And I used to call. So understand, I went on interviews. I did 3 interviews a week to win search business. If you're going to hire a contractor to put an addition on your house, you're going to interview contractors. In order to win search business, I had to interview with employers to win their business. So I did 3 of those a week over 40 years. That's about 6,000 interviews. So I got a lot of practice, and I have, and frankly, I'm one of the few people I know who really likes interviewing. Okay? And so I would sit down with people, and the first thing, the CEO of the company starts saying, "Oh, okay, tell me what you know about recruiting for e-commerce companies." So, well, I've done a lot of that, So, and I noticed your company that's your business. And by the way, I was really interested in your business idea because it's so unique. What gave you the idea to do this? So, who's in charge here? So yes, people. So what you have to do is, that's a technique in my book. It's called the porcupine technique. When people throw questions at you, instead of responding directly, you can do some sort of response. You can't avoid these questions, but you ask a question back and reassert control. So in rapport building, you ask the question, get the person talking. Don't sit there silent like a bump on a log. Period.
I hear your point. I hear your point. So it's we've got a few minutes left. Les, I really appreciate this engagement, the conversations, lots of good questions. I'm gonna drop the link to Les's Google channel, his Google Drive, where you're gonna get all of this content. I'm gonna share Les's LinkedIn profile so you can find him and follow him on LinkedIn. And really, I've been through it. Lots of good stuff to consume and help you. So Les, I really appreciate it. We're on almost the top of the shutdown here. Thanks a lot for coming. I really appreciate you being here today.
Can I have 30 seconds more to finish one thought?
Quickly, because we got to close with Cindy, me.
Yeah, I'll finish it. So the thing is about this. So this, I forget, the person whose instinct is to be silent, that shows that they're not comfortable selling. They don't have a sales personality. And so you've got to get over your discomfort at that. Fight your instincts. Do what I say, not what your instincts tell you.
Yeah.
Okay? What I'm telling you works for thousands of people over decades.
Yeah.
And what your instincts are, I'm telling you, don't do it. Try it my way.
Yep. Good point. Good point. Okay. Good. Thank you very much, Les. Good stuff. I appreciate that. I get your point. Cindy, do you have a story for today?
Why don't you give your story first, then I'll give mine.
All right, Randy. So, hey, here's my story. I love these conversations. I learned a long time ago that I know what has worked for me. What I don't know is what I haven't tried. And what I don't know how well it will work is what I haven't tried. And so when I'm, as Les and I were talking over the last few weeks, and I looked at his content, I looked at his Google Drive, there's lots of ideas on there that I have not tried. So what I offer is this. Again, I'm going to go back to that phrase that I learned a long time ago from my Toastmaster, who's a lady, Marcia. Marcia was my Toastmasters coach for many years. And Marcia said, Teddy, practice, practice, practice. And she would ask me, Teddy, what does practice create? And I used to say, perfect. And she'd go, no, that's not what practice creates. Practice creates permanent. And when you practice something and you get good at it, you will permanently use those tactics until you discover another tactic that you need to go practice, and it may create a better result. And then you permanently implement that. So I encourage you, as I'm going to share the content that Les has given a lot of great content, I encourage you to go look at it, consider it, and practice it. Cindy, you have a story?
Yes. So I know through so many different interviews in my life, especially in corporate America, that first impression makes a big difference. I once got told, we almost didn't hire you because you were so serious. So remember that they're looking at you as a person. So when you talk about getting basic selling skills, that's something that I've not emphasized to people. That was an aha moment for me today, because people do need basic selling skills no matter what in life, not just interviews, just basically building rapport with people. We've got to learn those. And since you have it down to those exact steps, I don't see how they couldn't walk away with something new to use throughout their life.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Les, again, thanks a lot for coming. I really appreciate
the invitation. Enjoyed it.
Let's you and I connect later, because I'm always open to coming and helping in other groups. So if you're in another group that I can help out in, let's talk about that later on and see if that's something I can do. Hey, next week would be November 17th, Wednesday, 11:55 a.m. Cyrus Bush will be our special guest. Randy will be back on the show. He better be, or Cindy may have a full-time gig here, or Lisa, because Lisa's also sitting out there, or Leslie's sitting out there waiting to be replace Randy. But Cyrus is going to be in the show. Cyrus comes from hospital chaplaincy. He's a chaplain at a hospital. He's also a musician and an educator. He's going to come and join us, and the conversation is going to be, listen to these words, a positively powerful performance. That's the conversation. Randy and I have talked to Cyrus. He's a really cool guy, smart guy. Going to be another great addition to our special guest list. So show up next week where Cyrus will be on the show with Randy and I. And if you have any suggestions for speakers, any suggestion for topics, specifically speakers that you can introduce us to, that's really important to help us find good speakers. We're always open to those conversations. If you have a suggestion of a sponsor who can help us grow your show, please reach out to Randy and I and introduce us to sponsors that you think can be aligned with the show, and again, to help it grow for you. So Cindy, thanks for coming in today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Are you open to doing this again?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to make sure I didn't, make it tough or difficult to do, So, but again, Les, you have a great day. Thanks a lot for showing up. We'll talk later.
Thanks for everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for the questions.
Okay, cool. All right, everybody take care. We are closing on time today. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.